Hi everybody, it's Terry Ryder from Hotspotting. This weekend, as we all know, I'm sure, federal election is on, and I for one, not particularly looking forward to it because as I see it, the choice is between dumb and dumber. One of the worst choices ever in my time as a voter. And that's true across many topics and policy areas, but none more so than in the area which the policies that have been put forward by the major parties which impact on the housing market. What's evident to me is that, firstly, politicians don't understand the housing market, and they seem to lack the ability to think their policies through to logical conclusions. That's the only explanation for some of the policies that have been put forward by the major parties. But first, a bit of background. Most of the policies that we're seeing from the Liberal Party, the Labor Party, etc., that impact on the housing market address or purport to address the issue of housing affordability, except they don't, not in any meaningful way. But by way of background, we've just had some figures out this week that show that first home buyers are actually particularly active at the moment. I'm not suggesting that it's easy or that housing is particularly affordable. Right now we have a particularly high level of activity by first home buyers. In the month of March, according to the official figures, the market share of first home buyers was, as a percentage of owner-occupier loans in March, was almost 28%. And that's the highest it's been for 7 years, the highest it's been since 2012. So one way or the other, first home buyers are out there pretty active at the moment. There are three main components for the equation that determines affordability as it's usually defined. One is the level of pricing, obviously. Another is the level of wages, incomes. And the third is the level of interest rates. Now, all of those factors are currently trending in helpful directions. The average situation in Australia, mainly because of Sydney and Melbourne, is that prices are down. It's not the case everywhere. But certainly in the bigger cities, as a general statement, prices are down. We have seen some growth in incomes, not as much as the Reserve Bank and others would like to see, and obviously wage earners, but nevertheless, wages have been nudging upwards and interest rates remain at very, very low levels. And we're seeing the major lenders competing for the business of home buyers and investors at the moment. So there's interest rate deals on offer that make that side of the equation quite attractive. So affordability has improved. That's been shown by recent research figures published in the last few weeks. Nevertheless, it could be a whole lot better, and it could be made a whole lot easier for young buyers to get into the market. So we have from both of the major parties policies which purport to help that. We've just had the Liberal Party announce its first home loan deposit scheme, which in essence means that first-time buyers can get a home loan with only a 5% deposit rather than having to have a 10 or 20% deposit. You need a 20% deposit to avoid paying mortgage insurance, but you can get a loan for a deposit as low as 10% at the moment. But they're introducing a scheme which apparently will mean if you can come up with a 5% deposit, you can get a loan that's guaranteed by the federal government, although it's limited to I think the first 10,000 applicants, and there's a lot more in a typical year first home buyers out there than that. So it's a little bit limited in that regard. So that's what the Liberal Party has proposed to do to help first home buyers get into the market. And it's better than a poke in the eye with a sharp stick. And the Labor Party has said basically, me too, we'll do the same thing. So it seems to be broadly supported. And yeah, it's not going to hurt, although there's been some negative reaction to it, as is always the case in our very negatively minded media. But the thing is, it doesn't really address the core issues, the real issues about housing affordability. Now, Labor's purported response to affordability is their scheme to scrap negative gearing on property investments other than new properties, and also to reduce the capital gains capital gains tax concession. It says this will help first home buyers. However, when questioned by media, and they've been asked this question many times, Bill Short and Chris Bone, well, does this mean that therefore that your policy will force down housing prices? And the answer is no, they say. They say it won't. And if that's the case, how then does it improve housing affordability? If housing prices don't drop, then affordability doesn't improve from this policy. And this question was asked recently by the Housing Industry Association. Their managing director, Graham Wolfe, said, how will first home buyers be better able to compete in the housing market if raising the taxes on residential property, which is essentially what they're doing with this negative gearing policy, doesn't impact on house prices, doesn't force prices down? How will additional taxation on housing deliver more affordable housing? It's a very good question, because simply the answer is it doesn't, by their own admission. It won't push down prices, they say, therefore it doesn't improve housing affordability. It's bullshit, basically. Put in simple terms, this is a revenue measure. They try to dress it up as a measure to help first home buyers by improving affordability, but by their own admission, it doesn't improve affordability. Therefore, it's a nonsense argument. The Liberal Party policy with the deposit scheme, it'll help a little, but it's not addressing the core issues. Labor's policy on negative gearing, no, that won't help. They say so themselves. And I also would take it a step forward and say it's actually going to make it worse for first home buyers. Why? Well, because it's going to mean that everyone's going to be compelled to buy new property. At the moment, a first home buyer can only get a grant from the state government if they buy new. They can't get a grant if they buy established. So there's a big incentive there for first home buyers to buy new property rather than established property, despite the fact that established property, generally speaking, is cheaper. And that's the big problem. New property is so expensive. The recent changes to depreciation regulations mean that investors are encouraged to invest in new property also, because they only get the full depreciation benefits on new property. They don't get it on second-hand stuff. And now we've got this Labor Party policy that says you won't get negative gearing tax benefits unless you buy new. So we're going to end up with a situation where everyone, investors and first-home buyers, are going to be compelled to buy new property. They're going to be on a collision course. Now that's totally the opposite to what the Federal Labor Party says it's trying to achieve. Bill Shorten says they're introducing these measures to scrap negative gearing, except on new, so that first home buyers don't have to compete with investors on the same property. But their policy is actually going to achieve the opposite. It's actually going to put them in direct opposition, because everyone's going to be wanting to buy new. According to the intent of this policy, investors will have to buy new, and first home buyers need to buy new if they want to get a grant. So they haven't thought it through. They haven't thought through the consequences. And there's also, further to that, some research out there that suggests that investors aren't going to behave the way that the Labor Party expects them to behave as a result of this policy. The whole intent, presumably, is that if we scrap negative gearing except on new property, that's going to encourage everyone to buy new, and therefore we're going to have more construction and it's going to create more jobs. But according to some recent research by the Property Council of Australia, the survey found that 33% of investors say they will probably buy new property under existing tax arrangements, but only 24% say that they will under the proposed arrangements. And that's partly because they don't want to buy new, because when they come to sell it, it will be no longer new, it'll be a second-hand property, and the market for that property will be massively reduced, because first-home buyers are going to be wanting to buy new, so they don't want to buy this second-hand property that an investor bought new previously, and the same is going to apply for investors. So it's going to affect the behaviour on investors in ways that the Labor Party hasn't envisaged, because the resale proposition of a property that's bought new, when you resell it later, your market of buyers is going to be greatly diminished. And that's a consequence that the Labor Party politicians haven't considered, because they don't really know anything about real estate markets. They haven't thought it through. They probably don't give a damn anyway. And there's going to have consequences they haven't thought of. And another consequence they haven't probably imagined is it's going to unleash the spruiker industry in massive proportions. We saw it in years gone by, particularly in the 1990s, where there were get-rich-quick seminars happening all over the country, encouraging people to buy off-the-plan new apartments. And people were charging outrageous fees for seminars to help people get rich quick through this method. And of course, it was all a sham, and a lot of people were ripped off and lost money. I think that industry is going to be reactivated by this policy, because it's going to compel investors as well as first-home buyers to be considering very strongly new property, off-the-plan apartments, for example, as well as house and land packages. Of course, not everyone out there marketing these sorts of properties are spruikers, but there will be a very strong spruiker element coming back in. A large proportion of it was drummed out of existence partly by government regulation previously, but they'll be back, because there's going to be a lot of money to be made with so many people being encouraged by government measures to buy new property. And that means off the plan stuff, high-rise apartments, not necessarily a great investment. Another consequence that the politicians haven't considered, they just haven't thought it through. So if you are a voter out there who care about some of these issues that impact the housing market, particularly housing affordability, it's a pretty poor choice. The Labor Party policy about negative gearing isn't going to help. It's going to cause unforeseen problems. It's certainly not the answer. The answer actually is addressing the massive burden of taxes, fees and charges that are imposed on the housing industry and creating new dwellings. It's the cost of new dwellings that's the problem. That's the thing that politicians can address without impacting the broader market, without forcing down the value of people's homes. The existing homes values don't need to be affected by this. They can address the affordability problems by making new housing considerably cheaper, by stop treating the housing market as a cash cow. That's what they're doing at all three levels of government. Land tax, stamp duty, capital gains tax, GST, rates, infrastructure charges, application fees at the council level. The list goes on and on. All three levels of government treat the housing market as their favourite source of revenue, and they just keep lumping more and more costs into it, and that just adds to the price that first-home buyers have to pay when they buy a new house and land package or a new apartment. That's the nub of the housing affordability issue, and they're not addressing it because it means having to give up some of that lovely revenue that they love to rip out of the housing industry every year. So I don't think it's ever going to change because they're addicted to that revenue, but that's the answer to the housing affordability problem, bringing down the cost of new dwellings, which are ridiculously and unreasonably high in this country. And the policies that have been announced in this federal election don't address that. They're just tinkering around the edges of the problem, and they're not really doing anything that will make meaningful change. The Liberal Party policy with guaranteeing loans on 5% deposits, that helps people get into the market, but it doesn't improve affordability. They're still paying the same high price for what they're buying, and that's the nub of the problem. Okay, that's enough of a rave about that. I just think it's a really poor choice. There's nobody out there that's presented a policy that's going to do anything meaningful about the real issues impacting the housing market, particularly affordability. Terry Ryder signing off. Tune in tomorrow night around the same time where I'll be doing my weekly feature every Tuesday night, which is Hotspot of the Week. Okay, bye for now.